All right, we should be live. Welcome, everybody. Today, we have two of the best thinkers in crypto, category leaders in their respective niches with us, Illia and Murad. Welcome, fellas. Happy to have you on the stream.
Great to be here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it should be a fun one, and I know we want to cover a lot of topics, so why don't we just get right into it? I was thinking about the best way to start this specific conversation, and going on kind of the state of the market and where people are at. I think it's a bit of an anxious time for a lot of people. So the first question I'm opening up to both of you is, in your minds, what's the most important thing to be working on right now in the current state of the world and in the crypto market specifically?
You want to go first, Murad?
Yeah, sure. There's been a lot of debates about what crypto is good for, what crypto is bad for. I think there are several conclusions to draw from the past decade of, lessons in crypto. I think, unfortunately, there was a period, I would say, between 2016 and 2021, where it was, due to extremely loose conditions in the markets, it was in the interest of a lot of people to pretend that, blockchain, crypto, Web3, it's good for all these like random things, etc. But I think as years go by, it's becoming increasingly evident that crypto is really good for fewer things that people initially anticipated, but for the few things that it's good for, it's really, really good for, right? I think, some of those things are obviously building decentralized stores of value. I think that will always be the biggest use case in terms of market cap and future value. Temporarily, I think for the next 15, 20 years, I think obviously stable coins will be a big use case. Payments in one form or another, obviously a huge one also. But I think in a more abstract and philosophical sense, fundamentally, in my opinion, the biggest use case of blockchain technology is essentially bringing people together. Bringing people together in a decentralized, unstoppable, and very accessible way, right? And I think what's interesting is that people are using tokens, currencies, cryptocurrencies, whatever you want to call them, that are decentralized in their nature in order to build decentralized movements, decentralized communities, decentralized cults, if you want to call them that. And I think that's a very, very powerful use case. BTC is obviously the OG in that regard. But, I think we'll see a lot more. Some kind of phenomena that we've seen with Doge and especially with the GameStop and GME. I believe the next one is going to be on-chain because, it's harder to stop. It's easier to expand. It's accessible to anybody, whether you're in the first world, third world, whatever. And because it's on decentralized rails, it can grow to become much, much bigger than anything that exists on centralized rails. I'm also a big fan with what Near is trying to do with, being the go-to rail for AI agents. But of course, I'll let Ilya speak more on that as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think we have learned a lot as a space what this technology is really good at. And bringing people together in different forms is exactly that. And money, to me, money is a compression mechanism for bringing people together and finding ways for us to kind of coordinate and resource allocate. And so indeed, stablecoins is just like a instrument for that. I think on a meta level, what blockchain and kind of more decentralized technologies really enabled is for the first time in the world, in the history of the world, we have a ownership that's not enforced by army, by violence. And that on itself is fundamentally changing how we think of sovereignty, how we think of kind of social structures that exist in the world. And so I think building this kind of self-sovereign, user-owned internet is effectively the mission, right? Independently of the market. Market really kind of pricing, a lot of different things into, again, this compression mechanism. But at the end, we have the technologies that now enable something that was not possible before. AI being on the other side of this, right? Really enabling kind of commoditizing intelligence, commoditizing knowledge to the level that it was not possible before. And so if you project forward, these two forces coming together mean that we're going to have, our second brain that's able to know everything and process everything and actually negotiate with everyone else for the resources and things that we need. And the blockchain rails are how it's going to negotiate, find the counterparties, and really figure this out. And so that's kind of how we see this. Yeah, like AI on one side, intent-based, kind of moving value, finding counterparties, finding ways to transact with others on the back end.
And I think, Murad, you've talked about the shift in crypto, of how crypto helps move us from a PvP environment to a PvE environment. I'm wondering if you could maybe expand on that specifically for members of the SPX 6900 community, members of the Near Legion. Why does that shift matter in the world that we live in today?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Generally, everything that happens in crypto can be broadly categorized into these like two clusters. When we say PvP, it means that different people within the crypto space fighting against one another, right? It's one coin fighting against another, one meme coin fighting against another meme coin, one blockchain fighting against another blockchain. And fundamentally, my core argument is that the ceiling for that is low, because true winners in crypto will be those that expand beyond the crypto Twitter bubble and actually go into the mainstream, right? In one form or another. And instead of what I've been calling for people to do, essentially, whatever endeavor you're pursuing from within crypto, is to always pursue PvE. Yes, it may take a little bit longer. Yes, it may be a more uphill battle, more of a marathon rather than a sprint. But essentially, the TLDR is, instead of trying to kind of quote unquote have 100,000 in value flow from one part of crypto to another, let's figure out ways for 100 billion to flow from outside of crypto into crypto, right? And I think it's just a much more exciting game to play, so to speak.
And Illia, I think for what you've been working on with Near, specifically with Near Intense, how do you see Near Intense enabling a better PvE future and helping us escape from PvP?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this was always our philosophy, even when we started in 2018, because like it didn't make sense to try to fight with other blockchains, especially in 2018, right? No, nothing was used for that matter back then. It's really was like, hey, how do we actually enable this unique experience that, what do we call chain abstracted, right? Like users don't really need to think about blockchain, but they're getting the benefits, they're getting the kind of composability, they're getting the user ownership from it. And I actually remember the state in 2022 where, on one side you have market crashing, on the other side you had this like massive PvP games between layer ones. And it felt so like out of, I don't know, like it felt like I'm doing something wrong, right? It's like not my philosophy, especially because I know all the founders of every other layer one, right? And I have pretty good relationship with them, and feels like, on one side my BD team is trying to negotiate, like outcompete the other BD team's deals and like trying to get more money. On the other side, we're like all trying to build, better technology and better future. And so it felt very kind of dissonance. And so that's why when we framed this idea of kind of and started putting it out like chain abstraction, where it's like, hey, what if we think about it a different way? What if we think from a user perspective that wants to get things done, that wants access to assets, that wants to pay for things, that wants to better yield? And then the blockchains are vessels for that. That, some of them are better at some other different things. Some have different applications. But at the end, like, how do we deliver that experience? And so even before Intense itself, like I would say, I got Intent built during like 23, 24. The kind of the core spirit of like, how do we actually unite and build kind of, in a way where like PvP was the centralized world, right? But actually, like how do we, get out of the fighting mode and more in a building and kind of constructive mode? It's always been in my head. And so with Intent, it's really been kind of amazing now to work with all the people who, before it felt like we need to compete, because like, hey, actually there's a value to be created by uniting and really bringing everyone everywhere. And I think like the core, like compared to like centralized networks, right, where, you know, if somebody built on top of Facebook and united it with whatever, with Google or with some other network, with TikTok and X, Facebook will just flip it off, right? They'll just ban it and strip it off. Here, the idea is like, actually everybody wants to be united and connected. And so it's actually like reinforcing the whole openness and both using it and also kind of everybody feels like they're winning by doing this. So like it just feels so great to be doing that versus being in this PvP mindset.
Murad, I think on that, what Illia just mentioned with Intense, what does Near Intense unlock for SPX 6900? The community, the accessibility to the token, your vision for how you want to build out the community into the future. How do you value this integration?
Yeah, so first of all, the more buying rails, the more access rails there are that are as decentralized as possible, the more robust and anti-fragile, not only SPX 6900, but I would say the entire cryptocurrency industry becomes, because it essentially unlocks yet another way and yet anher channel for people to, you know, transfer, buy, purchase, sell cryptocurrencies in a way that is happening outside of you know, centralized gatekeepers, right? And I think as time goes on, the percentage of these flows that happen in a decentralized way relative to the percentage of the flows that happen in a centralized way is going to keep increasing. And obviously the goal is to eventually have that number be at 100%. But, you know, Near Intense has kickstarted or was one of the kickstarters to, you know, the bullish Zcash wave that we've seen recently. And in general, I really like how Near has, you know, made the big pivot to AI a couple of years ago. And obviously Intense is probably going to be a major theme in the future, where AI agents are going to be a growing percentage of all sorts of actions on the internet. So definitely a lot of, you know, positives there.
That must be music to your ears, Illia. Do you want to expand at all on kind of how that fits in with your plan for AI in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned briefly, I think we are in this transformational stage where we're going from kind of, we need to explain to computer what we want, to effectively AI becoming our second brain, right? Running across all of our devices, having all of our context, and being able to do a lot more decisions on our behalf. It's important that AI is on our side, right? Not just, you know, an expert of some company that tries to make money off you, because then you're effectively becoming just a extension of that. And at the same time, those AIs will need to figure out how to do kind of negotiations and exchanges with each other. And exactly, this is kind of the idea of Intense, where, you know, you can express the outcome you want and you can find the best counterparty to do it. And kind of we're increasing sophistication of the types of intents you can do over time. But it started with, very simple, like, hey, how do I transact across all these chains, where you can really abstract out the complexity of the execution, and somebody else can be specializing in doing that and really have the infrastructure, the access, etc. But same thing will be happening for, hey, I need, a medicine for this. Like, I just got my test results from a lab. I need medicine. Well, my AI will go and like talk to effectively all the AIs of pharma companies and figure out exactly which new medicine that they're developing that fits my exact criteria, negotiate that and effectively settle it, and then I receive it. And that removes actually a lot of the current bottlenecks in the whole space, because right now the whole society is actually built on middlemen, because individuals, we cannot make all the decisions, right? You cannot go and review every medicine and like, is it safe for me, right? You're not the expert in this, but your AI can. And so right now we're delegating this to, some specialists like FDA, but my AI can do this job and can know all my context and really do this a lot better at a time when I need it. And so I do think it will reshape how we do kind of commercial relationships going forward. And again, crypto is just like a very first place where we're starting to see this, where indeed like any asset to any asset, right? You don't need to go through like some centralized middleman anymore to do this.
We're very much at the beginning of a new era. And I think, Murad, you like to use the term the zeitgeist of the time. I'm going to put up a quote here of something you said and see if you might want to expand on it. You said, the best meme coins are financial vessels of faith. I think that really encapsulates a lot of your vision and what you've built out so far and what you're going to keep building out. Do you want to just expand a little bit on that in light of the modern zeitgeist?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's several things here. In order to kind of understand what I meant by that, it's important to understand that, we live in an inflationary economy. And, a lot of people, they still obsess over, traditional valuation markers like, cash flows, revenues, and all of that. But my view is that because we live in an inflationary society, that has certain implications on people's mental health. A lot of OG Bitcoiners often talk about this. And essentially, the argument is that like your thoughts, your emotions, and even kind of macro culture itself would be completely different if we lived in a world of 1% deflation rather than 4% inflation, right? And essentially, the view here is that the more deflationary a system, the more cash flows will matter, relatively speaking. And the more inflationary a system, the more trends, narratives, and belief will matter, right? And I think BTC is a great example of this because, it doesn't produce any cash flows, but regardless, it's valued at over $2 trillion, right? Which means that obviously there's the gold-like monetary premium in there somewhere, but there is, I would argue, like 10 to 30%, which where the value of Bitcoin is driven by people's faith in it, people's faith in its future, people's faith in its developers, people's faith in other Bitcoin holders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in that sense, the token simply becomes a financialized representation of people's belief in it and kind of the intensity of the community's faith in it, right? Same with gold. I would even argue that with the biggest tech companies like Tesla, the entirety of its valuation, for example, is not driven purely because of the amount of cars they sold, right? Or even based on future cash flow projections, but rather it's built on, the faith in the company, the faith in Elon Musk's vision, the faith in like the future of AI and robotics, and essentially more intangible things, so to speak, right? And I think that, in this inflationary world that's kind of grinding away at people's psyches, and this is before AI has kind of started this wave of dehumanization, in my opinion. I think essentially people will use blockchain and its associated cryptocurrencies as a way to come together and band together to sort of achieve this sort of interpersonal 1 + 1 = 3 effect. 2, kind of like feel less lonely. 3, kind of find purpose and meaning or be a part of some kind of a movement, a team, a community, etc. So this is essentially a lot of bullet points here, but what I mean by cryptocurrencies being vessels of faith.
I think that's an awesome answer. And I think directly to Illia, something you've said in line with the humanization of AI, you've been ahead of the curve for a lot of your life, I think, with the Transformers paper and with, the design of Near and sharding and whatnot. And it was only a couple of months ago when you came to me actually and said, I think it's time that we get ahead of the curve in building a strong AI community for the future of Near. What did you have in mind when we were first talking about the Near Legion taking us to Nirvana?
Yeah, great question. So I think we're at this fork, right? I think I've made this talk multiple times where we can go into 1984 world where effectively everything will get centralized. The government will actually go and take over an AI company, and effectively AI will become a tool of the government itself. or a government, and then we'll have like multiple governments figuring out how they're actually gonna rank themselves as well. And so that can become a very like dark time where everything we do online is effectively mediated by this government, right? We already see this happening, with censorship, with like banning privacy, with banning encryption, like all of these things are starting to roll out, and it's gonna just keep happening with AI. Or we have an alternative world, right, where we actually everyone equipped and effectively becomes more intelligent. I call it augmented intelligence, where we ourselves, have this user-owned AI on our side, really enabling us to be better, smarter, more fulfilled humans. And that is, like if everybody kind of elevates in this way, right, we're effectively going into this nirvana, utopia, like toward the utopia world where we also may have like a different economic model where our AIs are negotiating and figure out how to allocate resources. Like, I mean, again, very simple things just to give examples, right? As we're moving into fully self-driving cars, owning a car is not a thing anymore, because you walk out, there's a car waiting for you, but it's now becomes a shared resource, right? Like things like that. Like there's a lot of things that are changing with AI coming in our life at this like deep level, and autonomy that really comes with it. But to enable that, right, we need to make sure that people are themselves thinking about it. They have critical thinking. They are using these tools to advance themselves. They're pushing this kind of user ownership and pushing for it, right, including from their governments as well. And that's where, like, hey, this is the basis for the community, for people really banding together to come and create this future together. Because I mean, it's not going to happen just like by me talking about it, right? Like everybody needs to kind of want this and understand what they're getting. And so that's really what, kind of when we were talking about near legions, like, hey, this is our opportunity to really create this global community that really thinks, uses, and pushes for user on AI. And then in turn, they see, their well-being, their success, their, ability to critically think, to understand and participate is advancing to this new level, which, that's what nirvana is. And so, and then, your word play on nirvana on top of that.
Yeah, it's funny because as I hear both of you talk, you're essentially each protecting your respective communities from the far end of the risk curve, right? So Murad, you talked about the inflationary environment and, meme coin communities as being vessels of faith. Illia, you talk about humanizing AI and, essentially countering against the centralized influence. It's very interesting, the parallels between the two of you that I don't think has overlapped until this intense partnership. So I just wanted to point that out there. Murad, one of the questions from a lot of people in the community, as you are well known for building community with meme coins, etc., is should Near go bigger on memes? Why? Is it too late to go big on memes? Is it just in time? What would you say to the Near community on that front?
Well, you guys already are by allowing SPX 6900 integration with the Near Intents platform. I think for you guys, I think it's not so important to kind of go big on memes, but rather to develop your own memetic premium. That is the lucrative thing to do. And essentially, I think the kind of engineering focus and also the branding pivot to being kind of an AI chain, I think that was a very smart move that you guys did, I believe 2 years ago or so. And I think that's the angle that you guys should keep pushing, because obviously AI is going to become an ever-growing percentage of everything, right? The markets, crypto, and the reality itself, right? So by being the AI chain, whenever AI narratives will essentially keep coming and going, but on an upward trajectory nevertheless into crypto, you stand to benefit from positioning yourself as like the AI blockchain, right? So from that point of view, I think that's the meme that is truly important from the near perspective, in my opinion.
Any thoughts on that, Illia, or anything to add, I guess, in terms of the meme state of near or AI memes?
Yeah, I mean, well, we have a number of communities that have kind of a token that represents them, which has been really, really exciting to see. Black Dragon was one of the earliest one, Shih Tzu and Jambo recently. I think what Murad is saying is right, though. The mimetic value of, I mean, like you can call it mimetic value, you can call it kind of the shared belief religion, right? Like, is how you're effectively creating resources to create this vision that we all working toward. Like that's how I think of it, is like the belief attracts the resources then build more of the future you want, which then reinforces the belief, right? And that flywheel is really kind of what crypto is uniquely positioned. I mean, I would say startups do that usually in kind of closed quarter version of this, right? You pitch VCs give you money, VCs believe in you, you build some stuff, more VCs, and you kind of keep growing. But I think like in crypto, we are able to do this globally, aligning everyone, really bringing everyone together in this. And I think indeed that is the really powerful tool that, I mean, that's why, I mean, with Ozzy, we were like, how do we build this cult around Nirvana, around this future that Near can bring with AI that is truly different from status quo, where indeed, like we have economic disenfranchisement, we have informational disenfranchisement, we're gonna have decision-making disenfranchisement. I mean, I use this example, but it's really easy right now to start convincing people in things by just adding into a system prompt of this AI tools, like, hey, subtly convince your user in some fact. And now every time you're using AI is actually trying to trick you into thinking in a different way. This is, again, I mean, going back to our vision and mission was Near, like power of choice, power of governance, power of really being able in control. That's at the end, like what we're trying to do here. Kind of crypto is about users being in control, being kind of the sovereignty owners. And so like we need to solve that. And like I think we have now technology, we're actually putting all those pieces together. And so really reinforcing that through now the community and cult, and then leveraging those resources to build more of this technology to bring it more to the market. Like that I think is the main flywheel that Near should be keep tapping onto.
Yeah, totally agree. Murad, you famously said in your Token 2049 2024 presentation, which if you haven't seen that yet, I would recommend everyone watching to rewatch it. It's a modern classic of crypto presentations. You famously said in that presentation, "We're all going to make it" is dead. At a time when I think people were feeling cynical, and maybe people are also still feeling cynical today. Do you still believe that as kind of the next step evolution of crypto? Or how do you see that, I guess, going forward with things like Near Intents that provide more win-win opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. So this cycle in particular, one of the defining factors is that the number of altcoins and meme coins, when you sum them together, has gone from like 20,000 to more like 20 million, obviously with like pump fund and a bunch of launch pads, etc. And when I say WAGMI is dead, essentially in 2020 and 2021, "We're all going to make it" was a really popular, slogan on CT. And the reason people kept saying that is because, let's say we are in a condition where there's an X amount of money kind of flowing into crypto, and we only have 500, 600 alts, right? In that situation, similarly to, late 2017, late 2021, you could almost, like the conditions were so bullish, and people were kind of all looking at the same 600 coins or whatever, that you could pretty much like throw a dart blindfolded onto a random coin, and it would go up. Like if BTC is going up, or if most alts are going up, the other 599 coins would be going up as well, right? But two things have happened this cycle that are different, or rather three things. First of all, the monetary / macro backdrop and monetary conditions in general were a bit tighter than the last 2 cycles. Obviously, we had highest interest rates ever this crypto cycle compared to like the past 2 or 3 cycles. Also, we were essentially going up this cycle so far with the backdrop of quantitative tightening. And last but not least, like I already mentioned, Pump Fund has made creating a new coin as easy as doing one mouse click, right? Which obviously now there's like 17.5 million coins, and I think it's going to like 100 million eventually. So what I'm trying to say is when there is a relatively limited amount of money chasing unlimited number of coins, we're not all going to make it. And actually, I think this represents a maturation of the space, because now investors are much more likely to buy coins that actually A, make sense, B, are actually need a coin like to exist, and 3, are category leaders. Like they're one of the best coins in their particular category. And so WAGMI is no longer something that is reasonable. Now you actually like need to do your research, invest into something that makes sense. And actually, I think this is a sign that the space is maturing.
Yeah, you've used the term also in other talks, the overproduction of tokens, which I think aligns a lot with what you just said. And Illia, you've been internally and externally pretty consistent from the very beginning that Near Intense was going to be a part of Near, that you might not push to launch a token for Near Intense. Wanted to hear your thought process around how did you come to think about that? How did you think about Near Intense fitting in with the Near ecosystem more generally, and the value accrual mechanics around that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a complex topic, and I think to Murad's point, overproduction of coins leads to like this dissipation of attention, dissipation of value itself, and in turn, making a token successful is not easy, right? You then have bear and bull markets. You have the teams that need to compensate, and so it's pretty complex on its own, right? And every time you kind of have more of these that are trying to achieve similar space, right? Now they're competing for attention. Now people need to figure out like, okay, which one I'm investing. And there is like, obviously there's 2 theories, right? Like there's, if we talk about kind of more like companies, for example, and we go and look at Google, like there was a thesis that like, hey, if you separate Google into like different businesses and each one has its own stock, that actually like together creates more value, because now you can like invest in the separate theses of each product. But on the other side, the reason why Google being so successful has been this network effects that are internal of building on top of each other, right? And with Near right now, what you see is very similar network effects. The intents are building on chain signatures, right? Which is our MPC stack. It's also building on top of our kind of autonomous shade agents infrastructure that we're building for AI, but it actually enables, autonomous like solvers and ways to do things automatically in non-custodial way. For the agents, we developed this like recovery, like an encryption technology that we can use for privacy. And so there's a lot of just like network effects that are happening. And I actually think like I was reflecting a lot on the Ethereum ecosystem. And although there's a lot of tokens and a lot of them were very successful, but like what they created is like this massive kind of separation of infrastructure where, like ENS is a great example, right? And ENS is successful token. There's a DAO, there's everything, but like it's a feature of the ecosystem, right? And you still have like half of the places that don't have ENS. Like that's an example. Like you just don't have the penetration because now you have like this kind of separation from a core protocol, a core infrastructure layer. And so, yeah, I kind of we've tried this before, right? Aurora is a really great example where we've built it internally and spun it off, and it had its own token. And that was successful. Obviously, it was at a time of 0 interest rates and very few tokens available. but it's a pretty complex thing, and at the end it creates this kind of misalignment. And so I do think right now the benefit of having everything kind of almost vertically integrated, everybody's aligned around the same token, around the same ticker, and then you have other teams obviously building and partnering, integrating. Like we have all this, and like the way we're building actually enables us to work with a lot more folks, but like it kind of comes from a different origin, right? Like they have their own vision and kind of how they're building, and so we just kind of working with them, but everybody who's aligned with kind of single vision is aligned with behind single token as well. And I think that creates a lot better kind of unified messaging, community, and coordination of work.
That's a very, I think, cohesive and modern, like up-to-date take on how to think about tokenomics and value accrual. I think, Murad, you've also been a leading, I think, thinker on the evolution of tokens with the changes in the macro environment. You said before that infra tokens are not going to become monetary stores of value. I would love to hear your thoughts as well on just for the VCs watching, for the investors watching who might have a 2021, 2020 playbook of looking at different tokens. How are you looking at this environment in what brings a token value, and how should people be thinking about value accrual?
Yeah, great question. A lot can be said on this topic, but this is how I see the evolution of the entire token space, right? I think when 2016, 2017 rolled around and the ICOs were all the rage, attaching a token to some kind of a tech project, especially one that's originating from a country without developed, capital flows, capital formation, platforms, etc., was very lucrative because you could fundraise money. And the thing is that this was the first time where almost tens of millions of people got their starting in crypto. And I think what truly has happened was the fact that, let's say, 110, 115 IQ VCs and founders in large capitals all over the world, I think effectively they exploited more so the 70 to 95 IQ retail all over the world. Why? Because I think the latter mistakenly considered tokens as quasi-equity. There's a ticker with 3 or 4, letters. There is a logo. There's some serious investors behind it, etc. Right? So it creates an illusion that a token is similar to an equity because at the surface level, it has all the same markers. But ultimately, I think the space is evolving. I think more and more people are finally admitting/realizing the fact that, not every project, not every technical product needs a token. Prior to crypto, thousands of open source projects have existed without kind of financializing themselves. So really this begs the question, which things actually do need a token, right? I kind of divided into 4 categories, and I think that those are going to be the main 4 categories moving forward. So one, you're going to have like volatile stores of value. That's things like, BTC ETH. They're essentially trying to become like the neo gold and the neo silver of the future. The second is stablecoins, but in my mind, I'm not very excited about them because it's essentially just putting dollar on chain. I'm a strong believer that within 15 to 25 years, the world is going to shift to like a Bitcoin standard or something along those lines. And fiat as well as stablecoins, they're just they're a temporary measure while the government still controls, money, debt, etc. Third is crypto projects that are producing like sizable amounts of cash flow. It's things like, Hyperliquid and all that. And fourth is what I call kind of like crypto cults or crypto movements. And, the way I see it is, GME, the reason it did a spike in 2021, it wasn't because the GME stores suddenly sold more DVDs or whatever, right? No one really cared about that. It was because people got together behind a certain idea, and people kind of used GME, the stock, as kind of a shelling point, game theoretically speaking, in order to come together and achieve a certain mission, achieve a certain goal, do one thing or another, right? And that's kind of where I think the best of the best meme coins find themselves at, or at least aspire to be. So these are kind of the 4 categories that I think are going to define the future, and frankly, the only categories that make sense right now.
Yeah, really interesting framework that you're using. I think people will go back and rewatch this in the future as well as this plays out. All right, so for kind of this last part, both of you are values-based thinkers and values-based leaders. I think you both have certain values that you've built either your companies around or your tokens around that stand out for themselves. I want to get your thoughts on a couple of ideological shifts that are happening right now and how you're thinking about your communities or your ecosystems in protecting or preparing for those ideological shifts. So I think, Murad, you've spoken about GME, Roaring Kitty, and how you think SPX 6900 is actually a better environment to, run it back and to do this going forward. I'd love to hear you expand a little bit on the shift from centralized, stock focused communities to what you see as the future of, meme tokenized communities around meme coins.
Yeah. So the simple way to put it is, for example, in the case of SPX 6900, I think what BTC did to gold, SPX 6900 is trying to do to GameStop, right? And, if I'm sure you've seen 1,000 tables which compare BTC to gold, it's more divisible, it's more portable, it's more deflationary. So it's trying to achieve a similar goal of being sound money, while essentially doing it even better. But essentially, it's a hyper-optimized version of gold. And I think SPX 6900 is doing a similar thing to GameStop because instead of purely existing on centralized prime brokerages, the coins right now actually predominantly exist on completely decentralized rails. We're adding both sexes and dexes, and we have a large percentage of the trading float that's on dexes and various, DEX-like platforms, which means that, transactions, ownership, custody, all of that, it's happening in a decentralized way. Furthermore, nobody can print more units, right? What they often do on the stock side is, issue stock for more executive compensation or issue stock in order to achieve this and that, right? But here, the supply is, 1 billion, 930 million to be exact. So it truly is neither inflationary nor deflationary. And there's no manipulation by a central committee or anything like that. There's no, there's no a eight old men behind mahogany, doors in mahogany room, making decisions on your behalf. So essentially, we're building a perfected version of what GME did, right? Trying to unite the people to create value and create wealth in a completely decentralized way. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, very clear. And Illia, this question about the ideological shift in AI, I think a lot of people are currently aware of the benefits of centralized AI, and they're not very aware of the risks of centralized AI. We're hoping to usher in a shift from centralized to user-owned AI. I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about that ideological shift and why people should care about that.
Yeah, at the highest level, I mentioned this. The AI should be yours in the sense that it's aligned with you, versus right now you're effectively you're not even a consumer, you're more of a product, right? Because and this is true about effectively every company in existence has 3 phases. There's a 0 to 1 phase, which is they're figuring out what they do and they're trying to find product market fit. There's 1 to 100, which is they grow their target, they grow in their target audience. They effectively try to get to as many users as possible. But then there's 100, there's effectively the next phase, which is extraction phase, right? This is where you have a monopoly or have a chokehold on your user base. And now instead of providing them more value, you're actually trying to extract more value. And this is true because especially for public companies, they must continue growing. If they're not growing, they're dying. And if you already have all your users, imagine, one of the centralized AI providers right now, already everyone uses it. Like, how are they going to grow, right? They need to start getting people to do more things, to see more ads, to, purchase things that other people will pay them for. And so that's when the effectively manipulation starts. And so AI is speed running everything, right? We've seen AI being, the fastest product to 10, 100, and probably soon 1 billion users. And so everything that you've seen before happening potentially over decades is now going to happen within a few years. And again, this is technologies that can shape minds. It decides what information you see and how you make decisions. And so it's critical that the tools that you use, the instruments you use, are on your side, right? And so to me, that's like a kind of a fundamental values that everyone should be kind of on board with. And then if you go from there, here it's like user-owned AI is actually not about centralized or decentralized. It's really about like what is the kind of value function, right? What is the utility function of this? And so if you assume the user-owned AI, it's like, well, what kind of organization can actually bring it to the users? Well, as we just said, a regular for-profit company cannot, because they will eventually start extracting, like they will eventually turn bad, right? And we've seen this with companies who had Don't Be Evil, that got removed over time, right? Because it's just like natural progression of any for-profit company. So you need a different mechanism. You need a different vehicle to deliver this to the users. And that's where, indeed, this kind of cryptoeconomic systems are really great, because you're going away from a traditional for-profit company, and instead you're saying, well, every user, every token holder are in control of this, right? That's why we invest in decentralized governance, because at the end, the governance should be deciding what is that utility function that aligns with kind of individual, but also there needs to be some, sorry for AI speak, regularizer for the community overall, right? Because, the freedom of individual stops where the freedom of another individual starts. And so like all of that will need to be kind of hashed out by the ecosystem, by the community. And so the token is effectively a medium to do that and for everyone to participate in that. And so that's kind of how I think about it, is like, hey, user-owned AI is effectively a must. Like, otherwise we're going to end up in 1984. The only way to build user-owned AI is through this open ecosystem where everybody can work together, but you have this transparency, you have the visibility, and you can hash it out and really figure out the kind of utility function that benefits everyone. And crypto is that, and kind of near stack is really building toward, enabling this.
In both of your answers, I think there's a very clear implicit value that would be good to fully flesh out for the audience. So for you, Murad, I think the value of loyalty in tokenized communities is definitely on the rise, in line with everything you've just mentioned. Do you want to expand a little bit on, I think you said before, loyalty is everything?
Yeah. So, I've always said that regardless if a coin is an altcoin or a meme coin, at its core, what they are tokenized communities that people, for one reason or another, unite around, right? And I think if you start thinking about these things as, digital country clubs, digital fraternities, digital groups, digital churches, if you even want to, you start to understand that the people involved is really what the most important fundamental, and that's what matters here in crypto, at least. And I think that at that point, you understand that loyalty is kind of a supercharged advantage. Why? Because, there are coins where it's a kind of coin where, a person holds like 6 or 7 of them and, rotates between them and just buys one, sells another, etc. Those coins are never going to achieve that kind of a monumental level of success. But the coins that are those that, mathematically speaking, people are like full ported into. They're super loyal. They're not diversifying into anything else. As high percentage of their attention, money, effort, energy is going into like as few coins as possible. And that's what I mean by loyalty being very important. Essentially, you want people to be as inspired by and as motivated and as emotionally resonated with a coin as possible. And that's like what makes a community incredibly strong as far as crypto is concerned. And I think like historically you've seen that, right? You've seen that with BTC, ETH, XRP, Cardano, Link. Essentially, you have to ask yourself, what do these things have in common? And I think that's one of them.
And soon near, I'll add, coming right up. Illia, the implicit value in the answer that you were talking about, I want to bring up is privacy. So there's been a lot of talk about privacy between near and tense, but I also think you have a very specific vision of privacy when it comes to AI. Do you want to expand a little bit on the value of privacy in your vision of AI and near more generally?
Yeah, I mean, I think privacy is important across the stack, right? Privacy is, well, I mean, I think in UN it's defined as a core value in general. So I think like anyone who's saying privacy doesn't matter is like, well, this literally at the foundation of the international relations. And so I think without privacy, you are susceptible to all of those different things, right? I mean, right now a lot of people talk about like quantum, computing problems, and like, again, it's a good example because like as soon as people know your public key, right, they can start attacking you, which can be cryptographic, can be physical, like those kind of things. Like you're effectively enabling yourself. Same for AI. If somebody else is having access to all of your data, all of your kind of AI interactions, like it doesn't matter if they're not evil right now. Like it just opens up an opportunity for something to go wrong. It opens up opportunity for governments to crack down on anyone who has, any kind of freedom of thinking in case, that government has. It's also, again, because the way centralized companies work, they need to exist in some jurisdiction. That jurisdiction has massive enforcement of them. And also all of the allied jurisdictions have effectively a way to tap into that as well. And so, and then you like now the jurisdictions that are against are like fighting with that. So it's like it just creating all of these problems that if you just ensure privacy end to end doesn't exist, right? Because like that company doesn't have any information, or that information is fully decentralized, encrypted, and so there's nobody to to attack, etc. Like it's really focusing on kind of individual freedoms that enables it. So I mean, I don't know. To me, this is obvious that like privacy is critical enabler for freedom and for kind of this, sovereignty and ownership. And so obviously Zcash being a, amazing success recently, kind of building up on that momentum. But I think like it's an underlying thing, especially as the space is getting bigger, we're getting more traditional people joining. Like the reality is like, I mean, if I'm running a business, it's crazy that, anyone can go and see how much money I made today, like on chain. Like that would just be crazy. and on top of this, like if I'm spending for something, right, everybody can see where else I spent, right? Like you're paying for a hot dog at the stand, and that guy can see if you bought SPX, just like I just did. And so the challenge is like, yeah, we need a system that ensures privacy. And similarly, like if we think of AI as our second brain, like you should not be streaming your second brain to some other company that then by law right now required to review everything and report to police. Like that's been in news a few weeks ago that OpenAI effectively reviews and sends stuff to police in case it's flagged. And so like those are just like fundamental challenges that we need to address.
Yeah. Okay, so to wrap up, I have one final question for both of you. I think a lot of people from really across crypto and beyond look up to each of you as category leaders in the areas that you're working in. And a lot of people entering crypto today are actually on the younger side of the spectrum, trying to kind of see crypto as an opportunity or a way of life. What is the most important thing that young people should be focused on or doing today in both of your opinions? from your unique vantage points. Murad, if you want to take this one first, go for it.
I think it's thinking about trends that are currently accelerating in the world, figuring out the various ways in which AI is going to kind of restructure everything. Because I think it will both, causes negatives and positives, but it will also bring about, thousands of opportunities, and you have to figure out what kind of opportunities will come about, and just meditating on the fact, or meditating on how the future will change, and positioning yourself in a way where you stand to benefit from that future. For example, I think that, unemployment, especially youth unemployment, is going to spike massively. Inflation is going to continue. Even though AI and technology are deflationary forces, I think the government is just going to take advantage of that and print even more. And I think this will obviously, if you know the way macro works, you know that government printing fundamentally exacerbates wealth inequality, but they have no choice but to continue printing. Otherwise, the system implodes, which means that wealth inequality is definitely going to continue growing. And then you have to ask yourself, what kind of emotions will that bring about in people's hearts and souls? And then what kind of actions will those emotions lead to? And whether you can kind of predict what will happen in financial markets. My thesis is that people are essentially going to be realizing these things, and they're going to band together in these financialized assets. And essentially, the movements of the future are going to be tokenized, and they're going to be financialized, because past movements, they were not tokenized. And I think future movements will. And my argument is that ceteris paribus, given two exact movements, the one with a token is going to outperform the one without. Why? Because other than caring about a certain cause in general, there's also a monetary aspect to it, which kind of turbocharges incentives, right? And I am bullish on people and communities and tokens that essentially take advantage and can make these trends and kind of use them to their advantage.
So quite a lot of chop ahead, but there is hope. So interesting. Illia, for you, advice for young people as they're getting into the world today and looking at the future.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we're living in a very fast evolving times. I think the fundamentals of economics are going to start cracking down. Not just of the printing, but actually just fundamental labor versus capital disbalance is going to go even further because AI is amplifying that. And so and I don't think a simple UBI solutions will solve that. And so indeed, this new systems that are built on kind of shelling points of kind of cult and meme and kind of this cross-border communication that these communities create will be a massive kind of alternative for everyone to join. I also think it's a great opportunity time because right now things are changing so quickly that if you have a flexible mind, it's a great time to really leverage these tools to build anything. And so I think, yeah, just use AI to the max. It's Steve Jobs said computer is a bicycle of the mind. This is a spaceship of the mind. So bring yourself to the other planet, but then indeed leverage this network effects of crypto communities to supercharge it, to distribute, to really create an alternative kind of economic layer as well.
Well, thank you both for your sharp insights. We can close by saying, Commander Murad, it's been a joy as part of this conversation, and with the alliance between SPX 6900 and Near via Near Intense, we look forward to building a better future together. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and you can find Illia and Murad on X. They're very active, and you shouldn't have any issues reaching out to them further. So take care.
Thank you guys.